the faith. Now I want to also say something to you about teaching methods, because I feel again this is one of our problems. But this idea of teaching, now let me first say, this idea of teaching, every Baha'i teaches, is something that is so vital. Like every day we must eat. It's just as important as that. The same way that we said every day we read the writings, every day we must engage somehow in teaching. And it's a daily thing. Shoghi Effendi mentions that. It's a daily thing. It's not once a month going from one town to another. It is something daily. I remember, another important thing that I want to mention here before I give you some examples of this, is that Abdul Baha mentions this, that if we do not teach the faith, divine assistance will be cut off from us. I'm sure you've heard this. Now you realize that God is very loving to all creation. And yesterday we talked about forgiveness. You remember that? We talked about forgiveness. And how God's forgiveness, what things it can do with it. And I'm sure that God forgives all the things that people do. But there are certain things which to a Baha'i he cannot do. You see, God's assistance reaches the whole of this creation. If ever for one moment the assistance of God is cut off from people, they are not able to exist. The assistance of God reaches all creation. And God does not withhold His assistance from any human being. As long as they live, He's assisting them in whatever they do. If you go the right way, He assists you. If you go the wrong way, He'll assist you. Even the enemies of the faith are being assisted. Because God does not interfere in our actions. We have the free will. He shows us the way, yes. He sends His messengers, He shows us the way. He throws light upon our path. And He says, this is the right way to come, but it is up to you to choose it. And if you go this way, He'll help you. If you go the opposite way, He also will help you. It's like the engine in a car. The engine does not decide which way to go, but it will give you the power whichever one you decide to go. This is how God acts with us. This is how He... and now, He acts in this way. His assistance reaches all humanity. But it will not reach a Baha'i. Now imagine this, who does not teach the faith. And this is when the Baha'i becomes frustrated in his life. I become frustrated in my life. I become unhappy. Since I've become a Baha'i, I've become unhappy. Since I've become a Baha'i, I have all kinds of problems. It's the divine assistance which must come to us. And I can assure you that most of the problems that we have in our daily life or in anything we do can be and will be resolved if we become throw ourselves into the field of teaching every day. Then things will happen to us. Great things will happen. One will change. Now, I'm not saying that one should say, oh, well, I have a lot of problems in my life, so I better go and do a little bit of teaching so that my problems may be solved. But I can assure you that many of our problems will be so removed from the scene because you will be elevated into a different world. And these problems will sort themselves out. They will completely go into the background. Now teaching, which is a personal thing. I was talking about somebody in one of these gatherings some years ago. And a woman came to me and she said, look, I have become worried since you have been saying these things, that we must teach the faith every day, and if we don't teach the faith, God's assistance will be stopped from us. I said, I didn't say that. It's Abdul Baha who says this. Oh yes, she said, I'm worried still. I'm still, in any case, I'm worried about it. And she said, I am a very reserved person. I can't go out and talk to the people about the faith. I feel very embarrassed. I cannot teach personally. And now she said, what shall I do? I am worried, he said. She kept on saying this. I said to her, did you say you're worried? She said, yes. I said, that's very good. Keep on worrying. That's your solution to your problems. Really, keep on worrying. This is a very good solution. If ever we are brought to the point of worrying about something, you're going to do something about it. Do you know that? When you find in your daily life, it's the same thing. If you lose your job, or if your family has some problem and you begin to worry, then you are going to put one foot in front of the other and something will happen. Well, this lady went away and she came back again. She said, I can't rest. We'll have to do something, she said. She said, I'm very reserved. I can't talk about the faith to anyone. So eventually, after talking about it, mentioned to her that, look, you can go, and even though that you say you are very shy or reserved or whatever it is, go out every day. And she said, that's a good idea. She said, I will give 1 hour a day for Baha'u'llah. And this is a marvelous example. I think we should remember that. Why not give 1 hour a day to Baha'u'llah for teaching? 2 hours a day, maybe, but the minimum. And she said, I'll spend some time shopping, I'll spend some time at home. Why not give 1 hour a day to Baha'u'llah for teaching? And discipline yourself. And she said, I will go out. And she went out. She said, I'll go to a cafe. And I'll sit there. And she said she went to a cafe for 2 or 3 months, regularly. And the next time I saw her, she told me this. She said, it doesn't work. She said, I went there for 3 months, every day. I sat there, and many people came in the cafe and sat in front of me on the same table, shared the table. And she said, I could never bring myself to tell them anything about the faith. And she said, it doesn't work. I've given it up, she said. Now you see what happened in here, really, and this is another lesson we learn, a very marvelous lesson. You know, Baha'u'llah says that once you say you're a Baha'i, and once you enter the faith, He will test you. And always we are being tested, all the time. Remember that. As Baha'is, we are always tested. Now, it's not something that Baha'u'llah has invented and say, I'm going to test the Baha'is. In fact, testing, this is nothing new. This is a law of creation. This is a law of creation. Baha'u'llah mentions in his writings, God will test everything. He says, I will split a hair into 1,000 pieces. These are almost the words of Baha'u'llah. And each piece I will test. Now, test actually is a law of nature. You go to nature and you find tests. I'll give you an example of this. As long as you're sitting, nothing happens to you. But the minute you move, the air will resist you. If you go on a bicycle, have you noticed? When you're going on a bicycle, do you see how the air will resist you? This is nature. This is test. You're being tested. And the faster you go, the greater are the tests. The greater is the resistance. You see these aircrafts which are built up, which go twice the speed of sound. They go so fast that the air will resist it so much that the metal gets red hot. And they have to have a cooling machine inside to cool it off all the time, because it goes very fast. Nature will test it all the time. When Baha'u'llah says, I'll split a hair into 1,000 pieces and test it, this is true. Because if you look at the atoms, they're all the time under test. Each atom inside it goes through this cycle. Test is part of life. Every one of us are tested every day, without knowing it maybe. When you become Baha'i, especially. When you sit in a local spiritual assembly, we are tested all the time. It all depends how you look at your friend across the table. Just look at her like this. That's enough. I'm being tested. You know? You think of him in a wrong way. Not with love, Because Abdul Baha says the standard of consultation is love. Now if I look at somebody when he says something and I want to hit hard at her, you know how it is? Hit hard. Saying such a thing. I'm being tested. Hit hard in my heart, I mean. You know, I hope we don't get to action, but it's no use also to cover it up and be very nice and smiling, and then you hate in your heart, or dislike in your heart. That is what matters, what's in our heart. You see how we are tested? And so I am tested. And when I am tested, I cannot progress anymore. When you cannot pass the test, but if you pass the test, do you know what will happen? In our lives, when you are a Baha'i, when you pass the test, then greater field of service you enter into it. You will get to do greater service to the faith. You will want to do that. And as soon as you enter there, your tests become greater. Just like somebody who will go faster. Just like the aircraft which goes faster. Your tests becomes greater. And this is why people who have had not the capacity to pass the test, if they are in a higher position, higher functions, higher duties, they could easily destroy their souls. It's like a person who is flying in an aircraft. You see, if I'm standing on this platform and if I fall, well, I may hurt my knee. But if I'm flying in an aircraft and fall, that's the end. So if I work in a local spiritual assembly or a national spiritual assembly and I have all these ambitions in my heart and I'm not able to do the things right and I am being always, don't pass the test, I might hurt myself a little bit. I might become irritated, I might become cause of problems, but it is not fatal. And this is why those people who were close to the center of the faith, those who were close to Baha'u'llah, like man who flies in the aircraft, or those who were close to Abdul Baha, or those who were close to Shoghi Effendi, in the world center, if they had slightest impurities in their lives, if there was any feeling of ambition in their hearts, that little ambition will be magnified and will destroy them. You see? This is the history of our faith. This is why people who were very close to the center of the faith, a little bit of ambition, they will be destroyed. There is no room for ambition in the faith. And especially those who served near the center of the faith, their criterion must have been servitude. Absolute servitude, like Abdul Baha. He was safe. The purest branch was safe. The greatest holy leaf was safe, because their standard of life was servitude. Utter servitude and self-effacement. But the other family of Baha'u'llah, they all had ambitions. They wanted to be leaders. They wanted to be respected. They wanted to be honored. They wanted to be somebody. None of them endured and none of them could last. They all perished, destroyed themselves. They were very close to the center of the faith. But there must have been a lot of other ambitious people in the faith, locally, nationally. Well, they hurt each other and hurt themselves, but it is not necessarily going to be fatal. So you see, friends, one of the things to bear in mind is that tests come our way, always. I remember somebody said, there was a very outspoken, beautiful woman who passed away, a marvelous person who became great. She brought so many people into the faith in England. But she was outspoken, and she used to say, you know, when I was not a Baha'i, I had no problems. He said, I had no problems with people. I was very happy with everybody. I had no problems. But as soon as I became a Baha'i, then problems appeared after the other, you know. And this may be in one sense true if you are not able to cope with it. If you are not able to really approach people with a loving attitude and pass the test. God always tests us. Now this woman that I was talking about, who was sitting in a cafe for 3 months, and people came in front of her and sat there, and eventually she couldn't say anything, and she said, although I trusted Baha'u'llah and relied on him, he said, go out and I will assist you. He said he didn't assist me. Now this is how we are tested. God tests us to find out how much faith we have in him. This is true. When you arise to serve the faith, you teach and nothing happens. And then you say, well, it doesn't work. So what happens? Really, you're losing your faith in him. This is how he tests you. And when I pointed this to her, she said, you are right. She said, I've been tested, of course. She said, it's my fault that this didn't work out. It is not Baha'u'llah's fault. It's my fault. Because I was not dedicated enough, I was not pure enough, I was not taking Baha'u'llah with me every day. It's my fault. And she said, now that you say, I'm going to sit there every day. I'm going to go every day, 1 hour a day. And I will go if it is necessary for years. I will not give it up. And if anything does not happen, it's my fault. And she went. And you know, she was telling us the story after 2 or 3 weeks. She said, a woman came along and sat in front of me. She said, I couldn't say anything, of course, to her, but she looked at my ring. And she said, what is this strange lines on your ring? Oh, she said, I became so nervous. I couldn't say a word now. She said, I was absolutely nervous. And I began to stammer. And the more I became nervous and stammering, this woman became more interested. You see? She said, what is it? Well, I think she told her very little, and she said, look, you better come in here, somebody will explain this to you. And well, I can tell you this woman is a Baha'i. And this other lady is no longer a shy, reserved person. She is one of the best teachers. She's going around and teach. You know, it's like a child who has never had a food before. You give him a little taste of it. Once he gets the taste, he likes it then. And then it becomes a habit for him. This is the way teaching is. And I feel the idea of 1 hour a day, or 2 hours a day, or 3 hours a day, whatever you like, you choose, is a marvelous idea for giving ourselves to Baha'u'llah for teaching, personal teaching. Now, it is very important that we must remember the difference between teaching and proclamation of the faith. And this is something, again, that I think in most communities that I am familiar with, we are mixing up the two. And as a result of this, we are harming rather than helping. You see, I feel that many people who hear about the faith and they don't come to follow it up is because of the unwisdom of the Baha'i teacher. We say the wrong things at the wrong time. We say too much. We kill him off in the first encounter. Really. We kill him off in the first encounter. And this happens, I believe, a great proportion of people who hear about the faith and do not come in is because of the unwisdom of the friends, of our teachers. And I will explain to you what I mean by this in practical terms. The first thing which happens is that we are so used in doing impersonal teaching that we think when I hold a public meeting in a town and I advertise it and people come there to hear about the faith, I think I'm teaching the faith there. I'm not. That is not a platform for teaching. If you begin to teach the faith there, you are going to do some harm. Now, I'm going to explain this to you, because I'm sure some of you may be surprised to hear this. Of course, when you go behind the radio, television, and the newspapers, you cannot teach the faith there. You can proclaim, you can give the message of Baha'u'llah. It's very different from teaching. To give the message of Baha'u'llah, yes, you do that. In a public meeting, in a hotel or somewhere, you hold it and you advertise it and people come there. Because people who come to the public meetings, they have never heard of the faith before. Or you must assume they have never heard of the faith before. You cannot teach a person that you do not know. That's a basic principle. But you can give him the message. That's all you can do in a public meeting, is to give him the message of Baha'u'llah, what it is. But we must not make an attempt, in my view, to... Very different, completely different. To give a message, yes, there is a public meeting, you are behind the radio, behind the television. There are certain things we must remember to do and certain things not to do when you are giving the message. I'm just talking about proclamation activities, like giving the message of Baha'u'llah in a public meeting. Remember, I'll tell you another story which perhaps will illustrate this. There was a man who for 10 years was telling me did not become a Baha'i. And I asked him why. What's this? He said, the first public meeting I went to, somebody was talking about spiritual things, said spiritual assembly, spiritual this, spiritual that. Several times he used the word spiritual. And he said, I thought Baha'is are spiritualists. And I didn't like spiritualists. So any time during these 10 years that people talked to me about the faith, I said, this is not for me. You see how one innocent word could get into somebody's mind in the wrong way and deprive him of coming close to the faith. Well, I'm not saying it was bad to say spiritual things, but this man got the wrong end of the stick. People who have never heard of the faith before, never heard of it before, if you give them a talk which is full of new things, it's too much. They are going to hear some things which they do not maybe understand or may do not accept. And you always remember the things that you do not accept. If you put yourself in this place, you go to a meeting somewhere, meet some people. They are going to talk about their ideology. What remains with you are the things that you do not accept. Now, say for instance, now you go out today, hold a meeting, public meeting, invite people there, and somebody stands up and talks about the faith. Innocently, very innocently. Say for instance, do it this way. Say, you know what the Baha'i faith is? It's the faith of love. We love everybody. We love each other. Yeah, do that a couple of times. People who have no spiritual background, they're going to say, these are the people that we were hearing about. You know, this laxity in their moral standards is such that they say they love each other. Now you see, you have to be very clear of what you're saying. You have to be so clear in what you're saying that it will not give people the wrong impressions, the wrong things. And therefore, we come to this conclusion that in such a talk which is given to the public, giving them the message of Baha'u'llah, not teaching them, we must be concise, we must weigh our words, we must not confuse the mind with a lot of names and histories, starting from Shiraz and the Bab and then the Siachal and Tehran and Baha'u'llah and Adrianople and Akka and Constantinople and the house and the Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi and the House of Justice and the teachings and the laws. This, you're killing him. You're finished with him. You're trying to give him the message. You're not teaching him here. You're giving him the message. Now, Shoghi Effendi tells us how we should give the message. He says you should follow the example of Abdul Baha's talks in Europe and America. You read the talks of Abdul Baha in Europe and America. Do you know what it is like? It's 10 minutes, sometimes less. And if you take out 10 minutes talk. And what does he say? Never a controversial subject. Never a theological subject, which somebody could come and argue with you. If you ever create a person who comes and argues with you when you are giving the message, then that's the end of it. We must give the faith, when you give the message in a public meeting, should be so simple, and talk about something that people cannot disagree with, so that when the man leaves the hall, he will say, well, I agree with this. That's good enough. You have done a good job. Remember, you are not teaching him the faith. Look at what Abdul Baha said. He talks, I'm saying you should say Baha'i. You should say the word Baha'u'llah. But please don't use the word Abdul Baha and Shoghi Effendi and all the rest of it. You're confusing the man. Just Baha'u'llah is enough. What is the difference? And then what you can say, as Abdul Baha said, if he ever wanted to say something about Baha'u'llah, and he said Baha'u'llah has come in Persia, he has brought us these teachings, and many people have changed as a result of this. Their hearts have changed. They have become beautiful people. And today I want to talk to you about one of the teachings or two of the teachings of Baha'u'llah. And that's it. And what he said, it was something that nobody could disagree with. Now this is giving the message. But what we go to teach the faith there in a public meeting. You can't do that. And I feel this is one of the problems we have. One of the major problems we have is this. We have to know how to give the message. You go and meet somebody in the streets, you want to tell him about the faith. You can't teach him there. You have to give him the message in a very nice way, in your own way. Whatever you say has to be simple, to attract him to yourself, to attract him to the cause. By all means, you can talk about some teachings, there it is, but not to go involve yourself in like a football match. You say something and he says something else, and you say something and he refutes and you refute, then that's the end of it. How teaching is different from this proclamation and giving the message. How different it is. Teaching, I'll tell you quickly now, in 2 or 3 minutes. Teaching, if you want to teach somebody, and this is what Baha'u'llah has said, this is what Abdul Baha has said, you must know that person. You must come to know him, you must love him, and sometimes maybe you have to approach him for months in your spiritual arms. You must embrace him, pray for him. And then, when you know, and then you begin to know him, and then you know what he believes in. How can you ever teach the faith to somebody without knowing what his beliefs are? Is he a Muslim? Is he a Christian? Is he an atheist? Is he an agnostic? What ideas he has? And then, having known all these things, and having loved him, and having attracted to him, you can bring him to your home and give him a cup of coffee, and there you can sit down, and then Baha'u'llah says, give him a little thing, not too much, just a little. He says, when you're dealing with a child, you give him milk, not a big meal. If you give him a big steak, he's going to go. You must decide what is then the best thing to give it to him. What's the best thing? It's just like his doctors. I know, for instance, in our family, my wife is very fond of this homeopathy, and I think it's a very good way of dealing with medicine and medical things. Now, how do they do it is that the doctor will recognize in you what you need to stimulate you, and he gives you a little bit of it. And that little thing which he gives you, stimulates you, is ready for the next dose tomorrow, in a few hours. And it's the same thing with the faith. You must know the person in wisdom and tell him some things. And sometimes you must not tell him some things. And even if he asks you a question, if you tell him something, it will be too much for him. It's going to put him off. You don't have to answer every question. You have to be able to bring him back to square one, which is the origin of the faith. It's the same thing with any profession. If you're a carpenter and somebody comes to you and he says, look, I don't know anything about carpentry, but I want to make this table with you today. You won't let him to make this table with you today because this fellow doesn't know how to hold a saw in his hand yet. You have to teach him first, prepare him for it for months before you can say, now this is the way you make the table. It's the same thing with the faith. If he has a basic question which is far ahead of him, you have to bring him back to the origin and try to begin to teach him. There are many things, and this is not a platform, I'm afraid, for explaining how to teach the faith. But in Europe, I hope that I'm hoping that as we go back now, and in some countries in Ireland, we've had some seminars for this, of how to teach the faith. And it has been, I think, useful, because it's essential to know so many things. I'll give you one example of this, and then I'll close. One person came to us, a woman, she said, I have a friend. And I have met him, she said, only a few days ago. I've told him about the faith. And I want you to talk to him. I said, well, I can't talk to him unless I know what he believes in. How can I tell him anything? Oh, she said, he just knows about the teachings. He's an open-minded person. He's an educated person. Anyhow, he came to our house, and we sat down, and it wasn't in our house. It was somewhere else. He came in, and he said, well, look, I've heard about your teachings, and I like it. And I saw he's a very enlightened man, a businessman, very educated, and so on. But he said, one thing I cannot accept. I want my freedom to drink alcohol if I want to. Nobody is going to tell me I shouldn't. I know when to stop, and I know I'm an adult and this and that. Now, what am I going to do with him? If I begin to tell him all the bad things about alcohol, he is going for hours to argue with me. When we are going to enter into argument like a football match again, backwards and forwards. He says it and I will say it, and this is no use. But you know, if this man becomes a Baha'i, this would be no problem for him. He'll give it up. Isn't that right? This will be finished. There's no problem. Now for me to try to explain to him the good points and the bad points is very premature. So what I said to him, which was surprising, this lady was surprised. I said, don't worry about alcohol, it can be resolved. Oh, we can resolve this way. Now this man thought I'm saying that we can give him a special dispensation. But you know, it is true, it can be resolved. I said, let us talk about other things, which are fundamental things. You don't have to answer every question which comes to you, and then you involve yourself ahead of time, like this carpenter who involves himself in making a man who doesn't know how to hold a saw in his hand to make it. If somebody comes to you and he wants to know about electricity, you can't tell him what electricity is. You tell him, go to college for so many years, learn mathematics and physics, and then come to me, I'll tell you what electricity is. It's the same thing with the faith. If somebody jumps ahead of you, you have to bring him back to the origin. These are some of the techniques that we have to have in teaching the faith. You have to be wise in teaching the faith. Well, now, friends, I think we are far exceeded our time, and that we will probably come back again this afternoon. Maybe. We'll see what will happen. What time it is, Mr. Chairman? 1:30. Oh, you have to eat very fast. This is one thing. Oh, I see. There are a lot of questions in here, and well. Well, I'm beginning to feel a little sad, because I think the time is coming soon that we will be departing. I suppose you're all going tomorrow? Some of you probably will be here, but some of you will be gone. And but it has been a marvelous time. I really have enjoyed every minute of it, I must say, being with the friends. And let us go straight away into the subject we were talking. It was about teaching, if you remember. And I was explaining that one of our problems, I believe, is that in our methods of teaching, that we have to learn. We have to learn, first of all, the difference between these two aspects of presentation of the faith. One is the giving the message and proclamation, and the other is personally teaching and confirming a soul, which is very different thing altogether. Now you see what I meant when I said that if you go into a public meeting and you begin to teach the faith, as we often do at our homes, in firesides, then you could, in fact, say things which could put people off who are not, you do not know them. You do not know their feelings, their ideas, their backgrounds. And that what we should do is to adapt our talks to their condition by giving them those teachings which are pleasing and which are not controversial. Don't open up controversial subjects or theological subjects when you are giving the message, but just really attract them to the cause, attract them to yourself by giving them something of the teachings which they could leave the room with it and say, that was very nice. But when we're teaching the faith, well, as I mentioned, we have to do things, we have to warm up the person with the love of God. And another thing which is very important in teaching is put yourself out of it, really. Let us not bring ourselves into it. The minute you bring ourselves into it, then this becomes a barrier. We must always, whenever you teach the faith, you must never go alone. And this is one of the very basic principles. Never go alone to teach. Always bring with you Baha'u'llah. And this will enable us to then win the hearts. But Baha'u'llah, it's not always easy to bring Baha'u'llah with us. I want to also mention that. He does not come with us unless we let him. We must let him to come with us. And this you might be surprised to hear this. We must let him to come with us. He cannot come otherwise. You see a generator of electricity, a generator. The generator is pouring its energies in the network, in the wires, pouring it. But not until you connect up your light and your instruments to it, will it ever enter into it. It will not be able to energize it unless you let it, unless you open the way, unless you switch it on, unless you connect it to it. It is not the function of the generator to connect something to itself. If you leave a lamp beside the generator for 100 years, the generator cannot say, well, this is really pity, this lamp is sitting beside me, I better connect it to myself. This is not its function. We have to connect it. As soon as you connect it, the energies will come. And it's the same thing with Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah cannot come to us unless we open the way for him. This is a very basic principle. He says, love me that I may love thee. You see? Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. Know this, O servant. This is exact words of Baha'u'llah. Love me that I may love thee. If thou lovest me not, my love can in no wise reach thee. He doesn't say, if you don't love me, I don't love you. He says, if you don't love me, my love cannot reach you. If you have not switched on the light, he's telling us, the power cannot come through it. It's very simple. And so here is where we have to allow Baha'u'llah to come with us in all our activities, in all our services. No matter what it is we do, anything that a Baha'i does, if it wants to bring results and fruits, whether it is typing a letter, whether it is building a house for the faith, whether it is making a cup of tea in the kitchen, not until we are able to attract the power of Baha'u'llah to ourselves can it ever be effective. Now I have no idea how long we can talk together, but I hope sometime we can talk about this, drawing from the power of Baha'u'llah. But if there is chance, we might talk about it. If there is not, you can read the writings. And when you read the writings, the answers are there. And the only thing I would like to mention here is this, that no Baha'i can be successful in anything he's doing unless and until he has Baha'u'llah with him. And as I said, he cannot come to us just like this. We have to prepare the way for him. One has to read the writings in the morning and in the evening, One has to say the obligatory prayers. One has to read the history of the faith, the history of his revelation. One has to draw closer to him. And then one has to serve the faith. Very important thing that we talked about it this morning. And one has to live the life so that he can come to us. But one thing that I must say here now, and this is important, and please don't forget this point. This is a very important point. God, I mentioned the first day, is very forgiving. We must not think, oh, I can't do it, I have to do all these things, I have to read the writings, I have to say the prayers, I have to teach the faith, and if I don't do that, nothing will happen. I think the writings, you can read it yourself. You take one little step forward in the right direction in any of these things, and God will come to you 1,000 yards forward. Once your heart is pure, and once your intentions is pure, then that is a beginning. And we must never become feeling frustrated, because Baha'u'llah looks upon our hearts, not upon your actions. This is another thing you must remember. He mentions himself, he says, how many people who have been fasting day and night, or